So another opportunity to use a microphone. This is always a great privilege. So, no, I mean, a lot of it you folks are going to get into tomorrow, but it's obviously a lot of those good lessons, you know, read the requirements and meet them. But just something to pick up on that is, I wouldn't expect our good World Bank colleague to touch on it. In the Canadian system, there is a very rigorous trade commissioner service. You will see that, I'm sure, in the information that Hussein will provide. Knowing your local market, absolutely critical. And don't hesitate to knock at the door of Canada's representation in the field in the country in which you're wanting to operate. There are almost always, even up to the level, depending how small the mission is, up to the level of the head of mission, High Commissioner, Ambassador even. There is somebody tasked with thinking about the business environment in which you're operating and the opportunities in which you might want to work. Go knock on those doors and ask those questions. Ask about the agency that you're thinking of working with. Ask about local partners. That there is a functionary that is thinking about that. And in the combined Global Affairs Canada environment, there is an increasing effort for the development and trade folks to think a little bit more and talk a little bit about more of this, because oftentimes the trade folks won't necessarily connect at the same level as the development folks do. But there is a recognition that nobody wants an initiative to go off the rails, a relationship not to work, a Canadian organization to land and leave with an unhappy experience. So I can't stress that enough. And you will hear about, and those that are meeting with me, I'll give you bookmarks, for the IFI, the Canadian, again, Trade Commissioner Service that provides advice and guidance to organizations that are trying to work with the international financial institutions, including the UN. I'm married to one, so I have a small bias, but they do provide very, very good information, and they do it in a very discreet and oftentimes in a very rolled up fashion. So in talking to them, they'll oftentimes say, well, okay, depending what you're looking for, you know, we know of this organization that might be interested in working with you. So they can act as sort of little mini informal bundlers, but they can also feed back in a kind of a rolled up aggregated fashion some of the challenges that have happened at country level and with different organizations. They'll know much more than oftentimes folks like us in the ED's office will know. They meet with a broader range of organizations, different sizes, and again, across different sectors. So it's very dangerous. Give me a microphone and I'll keep talking. Yeah.
I'll get Kathleen or Hussein, you got a comment?
I was just going to say, this is one of the examples where the ADB and World Bank and LBMDBs are very closely aligned, and there's huge amounts of conversations going on, regular meetings, harmonization meetings, etc. So that could have almost been an ADB presentation, with the exception that we let the World Bank do the global consultation. It's a very expensive and complicated process. What we found when we were at ADB working on this is we were coming up with almost exactly the same structure as the World Bank. We were a little ahead because we didn't have to do the global consultation, and the institutional politics are slightly different, but came almost to exactly the same thing. And my guess is after July 1st, when it starts rolling out in the World Bank, then the other IFIs will be able to get their policy bits in place, because you can't have a harmonized policy until there's a one that everybody can harmonize to. So nothing much more to add than that.
So I just wanted to talk a minute about the procurement, so the reform. To build on what Michael said, I think it's really important. The World Bank passed through Canada and consulted with private sector firms and with, I guess you would say, larger actors, and I was privileged to be part of that consultation. So it came up, like some of the things that are relevant to the people in the room. Cash flow. Like if you're going to bid, you need to have money. You basically have to finance this project and then get your money back. I thought I'd mention that. So if you don't have money, and this is where I make my little pitch for EDC credit insurance. So you can get support from the EDC. And in your binder at the very back of the workbook, we've included something on what each of these valuable Canadian support mechanisms can support you with. Another pitch I will make, I am working for EDC, but I'm not. I will say that EDC also has currency insurance. Now, when you live with a volatile currency like Canadian one, you've just given strategic alliance a whole new meaning, by the way. And your insurance for your credit, your insurance for your currency, these are two basic fundamental principles about operating in the international arena. This can be the difference between survival and failure. Credit collect. Let's just say you run a company, let's just call it IDEA, and you've been trying to collect your money for 2 years from a client. And you contacted your bank task manager, and he said, I can't hear you. I'm not involved in procurement. And then the country office said, hey, that's not our problem. You need to talk to the client. Well, the client already approved the payment, but just didn't pay. Now what do? You're saying, someone, please help me. For 2 years, everybody else is saying, just give up. And even my consultants are saying, you're never going to collect that money. And I'm saying, I am never, ever, ever giving up, by the way. That's just not in my profile. I got my money last week. I called the OLIFI up. I said, I got my money. I told the ED, I got my money. And they say, oh, you got your money? And then I called the task manager and I said, thanks for nothing, right? And he said, oh, that was the first time he answered me in 2.5 years. He goes, I'm glad you got your money. Because it's not his job to get the money. It's my job to get the money. Now, if I was smarter, I would have had EDC supporting me through that. For 1% and 1% only, you can get that insurance. And you should take it. Take it. That's the difference between being in the game or being out of the game altogether. This thing about zero tolerance on fraud, don't just skip on by that anti-corruption policy like Kathleen told you. There's a thing called the blacklist. That's the first thing you look at. Some companies make up other companies to hide being on the blacklist. Take a close look at who's number one on the blacklist this year at the World Bank. It's a Canadian. It's a Canadian, and that's not a beer commercial. It's the bad beer commercial. But it's a layered bunch of Canadian companies affiliated with a single Canadian company, and they're all on a numbered basis. Do your homework. That was the other chip I wanted to make on the procurement, because unfortunately, you then become as tainted as they are, because the bank has a zero tolerance for corrupt or fraudulent practices. And if you make the mistake of being associated with a blacklisted firm, now you are, by, I think it's only 2 years, I don't know, if you go down, 10 years. 10 years, and the cross-platform on this means you get 10 years out of every bank. So why invest your money, why do these things if you're not going to do your homework? Like, do your homework, do your research, follow. And finally, on the procurement reform aspect of this, it's very, very important to understand that there are many companies in Canada that are opposed to this imposition of a more quality-based selection process because they believe that that is going to take them out of a fair competitive advantage. So there was discussion in the procurement reform on whether it should be 80-20 or 70-30 on cost. But there's not a lot of appetite, and there's zero contracts in Canada are issued on a quality basis. There is a cost valuation presented. In Canadian firms, we've been fed this productivity and competition argument for a decade now. We're going to compete, and we want cost as part of the factor. And that's what Canadian firms reported to the procurement consultation last year. Was no, do not take cost out of this evaluation. It's one of the reasons why we win in Canada, is because we can do it better at a cheaper price. So that was why, yeah.
Well, that's a good segue for this afternoon. Vicky from EDC has been smiling on your comments, so we'll have Vicky talk a little bit more about EDC.